So, War Immortals has been out for a while now, but one thing I haven't seen is an actual build for the Animist class. Hello, team players. Today we're building the Damage Liturgist. Let's dive in. Today I'm going to start with Ancestries. The first ancestry I recommend for this build is Elf. Elf has good speed and a lot of feats that will help you get out of sticky situations. For example, things like Elf Step and Nimble Elf will help a lot. For Heritage, I recommend the Whisper Elf, as Whisper Elf will help you target concealed and hidden creatures, which is kind of a big deal for this build, as we want to do as much damage as possible here. The second ancestry that I recommend for this build is Human. We're going to be taking 2 first-level feats to begin with. So, if you take the Natural Ambition feat, you can pick something else at 2nd level. There are a lot of good Animist feats you can take at 2nd level. In addition, Human also gives you good aid feats, which can help immensely. For Heritage, any Human Heritage will work. Really doesn't matter. And the last ancestry that I can recommend for this build is the Trip Key, mainly for the Snap Tongue Trip Key Heritage, as that will allow you to more easily use damaging touch spells, since you can do it from a range of 10 feet if you take the right feats, namely Long Tongue, which you won't be able to take until level 5, but is incredibly useful for this build. For our attribute boosts, obviously our most important is going to be Wisdom. We need good spell attack rolls and DCs, since we are focusing on damage in this build. Next is Dexterity. We're not going to be able to wear much armor, so Dexterity for our defense is going to be pretty important. And we're going to need even more defense, which means Constitution is going to be important too, especially with some of the spirits we're going to be taking, as this build can be both melee and ranged. Of course, we're playing an Animist. That means we need an Animist Practice. And we're going with the one that I consider to be the best out of all of them, the Liturgist. This gives us the Circle of Spirits feats, which I'll talk about later in this video. And when we leap, step, or tumble through, we get to sustain a spell for free. Of course, that's at 9th level, but still. In addition, at level 17, we can use our Circle of Spirits feats as a free action. In addition, when we cast a cantrip from one of our apparitions, we can do it for 1 less action. For our spirits, we probably want to choose a defensive option such as Reveler and Lost Glee, because we'll be going from melee to ranged combat a lot. Otherwise, you want to pick spirits that will let you do more damage. Things like Steward of Stone and Fire, or even a melee option such as Stalker in the Dark Bows. But we only want to go into melee combat if we're under the effects of a apparition like Stalker in the Dark Bows, because then we can use our main apparition to transform like a druid can, which is why Constitution is pretty important here. As yeah, we get extra hit points from transforming, but we'll need more. Otherwise, we'll want to sit back and cast spells from range. And remember, we also have access to the Divine list, which means we can also heal allies with spells like Heal. Of course, if we're going free Archetype, then that's going to be different. But one of the archetypes I can recommend for this build is going to change your spell lists. But I'll talk about that at the end of this video. Of course, our first feat is going to be that Circle of Spirits I talked about earlier. This allows us to switch our primary apparition by spending a single action, which is a big deal in this build, as we want to be able to switch between melee and range pretty easily. In addition, this also means we can switch focus spells very easily. So if our primary apparition is Steward of Stone and Fire, but the enemy is immune to fire, we can just switch it and do something else. Amazing feat here. I consider this to be the best feat at level 1, so we're definitely taking this. For our second level feat, we're going to be taking Channeler Stance. Effectively, this allows us to do more damage when we're using our apparition spells and heal more damage when we're using our heal spells from our actual divine list. And remember, if you go human as your ancestry, you can take Natural Ambition for this feat, which means you can take something else here. Probably a feat we're going to take later on. But you could also take something like Embodiment of the Balance or even Spirit Familiar. For our level 4 feat, I've gone with Walk the Wilds. This adds animal form to our spell repertoire from our apparitions, meaning we can always go into a battle form if we want to, which means we can go into melee with this build all the time, even if we don't have a transformation spirit readily available. Such as if our primary spirit is a different spirit and we don't want to have to spend an action switching. This also means that we can stay in animal form for 5 minutes rather than normal duration if we cast Darkened Forest form, which allows us to transform into an animal for 1 action rather than 2, which we could already do at level 3. And staying in an animal form for 5 minutes can be incredibly useful outside of combat, especially if you need to sneak into a place. We are also going to need Channel Protection. We're pretty much always going to want to be in Channeler Stance, so this will give us the defensive option every time we cast a spell from our spell slots. Remember, we can be in Channeler Stance while we're transformed, which means we can transform into an animal or something else, and give all adjacent allies a +1 to their AC and their reflex saving throws until the start of our next turn. It's not hugely important, but it is something, and we get this too. So, effectively, if we're in melee combat, we can essentially give us and all of our melee allies a bonus to their defenses. Unfortunately, the Channeler Stance doesn't work for the damage of our unarmed strikes while we're in animal form, but we still pretty much want to be in it all the time, as you never know when we might want to switch spirits and do a spirit that does energy damage, or we need to transform out of our form so we can heal allies. Luckily, we can do that with 1 action with any of these spells, so that works out. We're just going to have to be careful of enemies that have reactive strike. Next is Spiritual Expansion Spell. This is a feat we can take at level 2 if we're human. Effectively, this is Widened Spell, except we can use it on a emanation as long as we dedicate our primary apparition to maintain the spell shape. It also means we can't use the Vessel spell, but we do get all the other spells from our apparition, effectively making this so we don't have a primary apparition. But increasing the range of a 5-foot emanation is a big deal, because some of our Vessel spells are emanations, which effectively means more range on those. There are a lot of spells from our spirits and the divine list that are emanations, which means we can increase the range of those. Next is Apparition's Reflection. This allows us to regain 1 spell slot from our apparition spell slots and immediately cast it. This does require the same amount of actions that the spell would normally cost to cast, and doing this does make you confused until the end of your next turn. But being able to just say, oh, I'm out of spell slots, no problem, just use this, pretty great. But the spell does have to be 2 ranks lower than your highest spell slot, which means you can't use this to cast a spell that's really powerful for the level you're at. But this is sort of a last-ditch effort because of the whole confused thing, as confused is a pretty debilitating condition. But since you can't heighten it either, this pretty much is use this to finish off an enemy, basically. Or in a situation where you just really need some damage. For level 12, I've gone with Apparition's Quickening. You must be attuned to at least 2 apparitions to use this feat, Basically, this is Quicken Spell, but you have to disperse one of your apparitions in order to actually use this feat. In addition, you can't use this feat if you wouldn't be attuned to any spirits after. At this level, you're going to be attuned to 3 spirits, which means you can use this twice before you have to reattune to spirits during your daily preparations. But it's better than Quicken Spell in that you can only use Quicken Spell once per day. But yeah, you can use this twice. And then at 15th, you can use it 3 times. Again, this is kind of a last-ditch effort thing, less so than the last feat, but again, at this level, you're only going to be able to do it twice per day. And after that, you lose access to the spirit that you dispersed, because dispersing just basically gets rid of the spirit completely. So you're going to have to be careful about which spirits you disperse using this feat as well. But this can be incredibly useful, especially for 3 action spells. Next up is Wind Seeker, allowing us to add aerial form to our aberration spell list, which effectively means we can always fly. In addition, if we are tuned to Stalker of Darkened Bows, we can add Bat and Bird to the list of forms we can take with Darkened Forest form, making transforming into a flying form a lot easier, since we only need 1 action for Darkened Forest form, instead of 2 actions. For our next feat, I've gone with Spiritual Spell Shape Stance. We have a lot of spell shape feats in this build, and this allows us to go into a stance that effectively allows us to use spell shape feats that require 1 action as free actions. So this is mostly going to be useful with Spiritual Expansion Spell, as that will allow us to effectively make emanations and our other spells that have areas much more effective. We are also going to need Monstrous Inclinations. We add Monstrous form to our aberration spell list, so we can always transform into things like Phoenix and Cave Worm, Purple Worm, that sort of thing. And if we're attuned to Stalker in the Darkest Bow, we can add Phoenix to our list that we can transform into. In addition, if we are attuned to Lurker in the Devouring Dark, we can add Cave Worm and Sea Serpent to our list if we cast the spell at 8th rank or higher. And those are some very good forms. But the Sea Serpent is a little bit situational, just because you kind of need to be near water to use that one. But the others, pretty awesome. And finally, for our capstone, we're going with Cycle of Souls. Effectively, this allows us to step and then go into any Animist stance that we know. Plus, we can do all of that for a free action when our turn starts. Not only does this allow us to get out of sticky situations at the beginning of our turn without spending a single action, but we can very easily go into either one of our stances, effectively allowing us to switch stances very easily. This feat does require the Liturgist Practice, which is a big reason why we're taking that practice. And I truly believe it's the best one. So, if we want to do more damage to a single enemy, we can easily go into our Channeler stance, or if we want to do more damage to multiple enemies, then we can very easily go into our Spiritual Spell Shape stance and use Widen Spell. And remember, at this point, our Ranger build that I did last time, the Vindicator, is going to be able to share his Hunter Edge benefit with us, which means our spells are going to be even harder to resist. This is why teamwork is so important, especially since the Hunter's Edge benefit applies to all divine spells, which includes our aberration spells. For spells for this party, you're obviously going to want to pick the spirits that do the most damage, as well as the transformation ones, particularly when you start being able to transform into other forms besides just animal form and pest form. But other than that, the only spells you're going to be able to pick are from the actual divine list, which you're going to want heal spells and debuff spells for those, as you're going to be able to affect enemies a lot more, since other builds in this party are going to be able to help you affect enemies more easily with your divine spells. And obviously, any attack spells that deal damage from the divine list, and there aren't many, but you're going to want those as well. Bottom line, if it deals damage, heals damage, or debuffs the enemy, you want it. Plain and simple. Now, if you got free Archetype, the first Archetype I recommend for this build is the Cleric. Just more divine spells. And you'll be able to take feats that will help with your heal spells, or your harm spells if you're actually going to use them. The second archetype I recommend for this build is the Elementalists. You're still going to cast divine spells, but if you really want to focus down on damage, the Elemental spell list is the one you want. But you also got to keep in mind that you won't be able to heal your allies very well if you go with this archetype. And the final archetype that I recommend for this build is Druid. Although Druids cast primal spells, and that means you won't be able to take advantage of the Ranger's Hunt Prey benefit with those spells, Druid has a lot of versatility. And that's something that is very vital to this build. So, it depends on what you want, but those are the archetypes I can recommend for this build. And that's going to do it for this build. Make sure you check out my Patreon page if you want a Google Sheet for this build and all my other builds. You can also check out the links in the description below for my Patreon, my Discord, and my other social media. If you guys want to check out the Ranger build that goes with this one, you can check it out right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.